Longtime Batman artist and the creator of Bane, Graham Nolan, recently shared a number of his ideas on how he thinks that the comic book business can be saved, specifically referring to DC and Marvel. He has a lot of interesting ideas, and we are joined by Graham to talk about them. So let's welcome Graham to the show. Thank you for joining us, Graham.
Hello, John. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I was really intrigued by the post that you made on X, explaining some of the problems that you've identified with the comic book business, which you refer to as Marvel and DC, and some of the solutions you have uh, to provide for them in order to kind of basically save their business that they've kind of thrown away and flushed down the toilet of their own making. So I wrote this up over at thatparkplace.com, covered your tweets here, and really wanted to kind of just dive into these here. We'll start with the first one, where you do say I'd like to start with the two biggest problems with the comic book business as I see it, and what I'm referring to here when I say business is the big two, Marvel and DC Comics. So I think that's really I like how you clarified that and you pointed that out. And then you point out that these two problems are two of the problems are product quality, content, and attracting talent. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you, why do you think that the big two deserve to be saved? And do you think it seems like you do think they deserve to be saved, but why do you think they deserve to be saved?
Well, there's a huge history. The history of comics. Really, comic books goes back to Major Malcolm Wheeler and his bringing up of DC Comics, and of course Marvel was the big upstart that came along. There's been many publishers in and out that have published and died out, but the big two have been the bulwark of the industry for a long time now. How they run their businesses is another thing, and that's a whole nother issue about their business practices and how to make that better. But the answer to your question is yes. I think they should survive. It offers more opportunities when the big two are healthy to everybody in the business. A rising tide lifts all boats, and if the big two are healthy, then retailers can be healthy. More creatives have places to go to work because not everybody's cut out for independent comics. It's hard work, and a lot of artists and writers, they just like to be in their little zone and do their stuff and get paid for it. So not everybody's cut out for it, but there's opportunities there for them to work and get paid with the big two.
Yeah, so is that kind of the main reason you want to really kind of help out people that are maybe coming into the industry? They're like maybe teenagers in their young 20s, and that's really where they can kind of cut their teeth, really kind of learn the craft and build up that way. Do you think that there's no really other alternatives besides from kind of the big two to do that, or is that just the best kind of funnel for that?
No, there's myriad opportunities for them. In fact, one of the things that's great today, if you're an up and coming artist, is that um, you don't need the permission of the big two to become a professional. You can crowdfund. You can get your with social media. You can get your product out. If you're lucky and you work hard enough at it and you're smart enough at it, you can and your IP is strong enough, you could become very successful without that. But you know, it's just another what I'm trying to say is that it's just another opportunity for them.
Okay. Can you kind of explain a little bit further about the idea of the rising tide lifts all boats? How do you see that Marvel and DC kind of are this rising tide? I get it from the retailer perspective, especially listening to the three retailers that showed up on Mark Millar's Miller Time, where they were
Yeah.
talking about how that increases foot traffic and things like that. But
Mhm.
how does that kind of maybe affect kind of what you're doing with Compass Comics? Do you see that like Marvel and DC doing well affects kind of your bottom line there, or does it have anything to affect that? Or
No, in fact, it's almost the opposite. The worse they do, the better I do. Because what they have done is they've alienated so many readers that just want to be entertained. They're buying Marvel and DC comics for the characters. That's what they're buying. And if you've got a superstar team on that, then that puts foot traffic into the retail stores. I'm not competing with that. They've got the superheroes locked up. I'm exploring other genres and stuff. But the fact that uh, that they've alienated so many readers. It's nature abhors a vacuum, and it gives the opportunity to fill that void. And I feel like that's what I'm doing, and that's what many other people that are doing independent comics and crowdfunding are doing, is that we're filling that void, and we're providing that content that is so sorely lacking. You know, just pure entertainment, fun, energetic comics, where people aren't sitting around talking all the time, or that they're discussing their pronouns, or any other stuff that they're trying to push forward in these comics at the expense of good stories. Stan and Jack could put little things into stories socially, but it was never at the expense of the story itself. And Stan was smart enough as a businessman, as an editor, to know that the bottom line is everything. Their job is not to social engineer. Their job was to sell as many friggin' comics as they could, and that means tailoring it towards your readership. The more successful you are, the more chances you have to do those on the side personal projects that maybe you want to get out and make a message or something like that. That you don't have to live and die by that, because you're successful selling to the masses. But that's not what they're doing. They're doubling down and producing more and more stuff that's alienating people.
So would you say that one of the reasons, I guess, why you think that Marvel and DC needs to stay afloat is because if they're basically competition for you, and it kind of creates a creative competition. It pushes you to do better than them. And if they're maybe getting rid of all the social engineering that they're doing, and they get back to kind of creating good stories, creating fun action adventure stuff, and really getting back into the fun and entertainment business, that would kind of spur you to create even better stories than them. And it really kind of you're just getting the best of the best, and it's all kind of cream rising to the top.
Well, I think competition is good. I'm a competitive fellow, played sports in school and stuff like that. I like competition. It shows you your weaknesses, and it forces you to raise your game. So I don't look at competition as a bad thing. And I grew up loving those characters at Marvel and DC. I would hate to see them. Well, they've been ruined. It's a sandbox that I have no interest in playing in, even if they had interest in asking me, which they don't.
Right.
But the I don't recognize those characters anymore. They've been totally taken away from what made them great in the first place. I mean, Batman, my God, how many people in the world who know who Batman is? In the stories, he's got
Right.
this cast of characters. For a loner, he's got a bigger family than anybody I know. It's just, and he's like Iron Man now. He's got an armor, and he's invincible, and he's super. He figures out everything. There's no vulnerability, and it's just the stuff is just not appealing to me. You know.
So so obviously you're talking about how you don't really like what they've done with a lot of the characters, but you still want Marvel and DC to kind of stay around.
Yeah, I want
Is
to
it
bring
because
back those characters so other
right
people can enjoy them.
right? So you basically want to fix them because you have such a love for the characters that they control with the IPs and everything
Yeah,
like that.
that they
Okay.
control. That's the thing that they didn't create. That the very talented creators created.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, that's really informative there. I really like that answer. So, and I think that makes a lot of sense because you do care about those characters. You remember them being at in their heyday, in their greatness, and you want to get them back to that. And I think that is definitely something that I think we all kind of really want, especially us comic fans. So I
Mhm,
really do. I really do appreciate that answer. Because I've always kind of struggled with like, well, these people are just doing all of this stuff and just destroying these characters, and it's like, well, I don't even want to read that stuff anymore. I don't care if they like go away because
mhm,
it's like a mind poison. But I do get that idea of we can save this if we can actually save this, it's worth it because those characters are iconic. They have this storied history and everything
mhm.
like that, and I do appreciate that.
Well, change is
So let's get
inevitable. Change is inevitable. Characters change. When Julie Schwartz was editing Superman, sales were down. and they did he hired Denny O'Neil, and Denny wrote the Kryptonite No More story and the Sand Creature type of storyline to depower Superman, and make him maybe more relatable. Was the concept of that project, but they never changed Superman's personality of who he was and what made him great. Um, so the stories, yeah, they depowered him. It didn't really push the needle too far, and so eventually he got more. He was blowing out suns again. With his
Yeah.
super breath. Um, but the point is, there is change. There's always some change that's going to happen. Because you've got to say. You got to keep people interested in the books, but you can't change what made the character great in the first place. You can't reinvent the character.
Exactly. Uh, so let's get into these points that you've made. You've done 4 so far. I assume you probably have a bunch of others there in your racking around in your brain there. But you first talked about these 2 points here: product quality and content, as well as attracting talent. And
Mhm.
obviously, you've talked about how they kind of go hand in hand. And so tell us a little bit about what you. I mean, I guess you talked about a little bit earlier there, but tell us about like what your suggestions are for fixing the product quality and content. I guess that starts off with pointing out like why do you think that is a problem?
Well, sales are a problem. And the sales are reflected of the content. People are uh, pushing away from it. They're not buying it. And the problem with comics is that if you lose somebody, they're not likely to come back. So
Yeah, we saw that with the retailers. Just to kind of chime in there, they were talking about how when every time they reboot a series or like do a 4-issue miniseries, it takes them forever to try and convince that person who was previously on board for the entire series, 300 issues or whatever they were doing. And
right.
so they had that person on board. Now they've lost them because they've rebooted the series. Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't want to do that. And you hear all these people saying, "Oh, but sales are great," and and the retailers talked about this too because the numbers don't lie. It's nonsense. Companies don't fire staff, lower rates, and get kicked out of their swanky office buildings when the company's doing great.
And
So
hide their sales, which they've done now too.
yeah,
They started hiding their sales figures too.
so we know things are bad there. So to answer your question, I'm a firm believer in strong editorial. Um, when I spent many, many years at DC Comics, there was autonomy in the editorial groups. Um, Denny O'Neil did Batman products. Mike Carlin did the Superman products, and they could do the kind of stories that they wanted to do. The editor drove the direction of the property, and they acted as stewards for the IP themselves. And if anybody tried to do something with Batman that went against what uh, you know uh, the, the quality of the character, Denny would shut them down.
Yeah,
And
if
so,
he's
but
seeing a bunch of looters riding in Gotham, he's not just gonna fly away like we see him do now. He's
yeah,
gonna
like he's
actually
not going to
stop
look
them,
at him and
stop the
say,
crime.
"Oh, they had a poor upbringing or something." They deserve those big screen TVs or whatever it is they're ripping off.
Right.
Denny wouldn't let that happen. So editorial having really good editors, and I mean trained editors. Not just fans that come in or they're English majors and they come in and they don't have any idea of the business, or worse, not understand the language of comics and the business of comics. Um, we have too many people in here from TV and movies or wannabe TV and movie people that think it's the same thing. They're not. They're different mediums, and there are things you can do in comics that you can't do in movies, and vice versa. There's aspects of comics that make it so unique and wonderful, and you need people to understand that kind of stuff. First off, to have that passion and love for the art form of comics, and I don't believe we have that. I think we have tourists at best. But then you have the editorial problems. So they don't know how to spell. They don't know how to,
Yeah, they're getting the characters' names wrong in the on
characters'
the
names wrong
covers
on
and stuff, yeah.
covers. I mean, there's a that stuff, you know, you didn't see happen before because you had this. this pass down of information of editors and assistant editors who would rise up to become editors. So, you had your Stan Lee, who trained Roy Thomas, who trained Jerry Conway, who trained Len Wein, who trained, Archie Goodwin, who trained, Mike Carlin, and all these guys, learned because they were in the business for a long time. And so we need those people back. We need editors that have a passion for the product and have autonomy to direct the books the way they best feel, in conjunction with creatives, and then hire the right people. That the editors should be able to hire who they want. It shouldn't be handpicked by executives who are distant from it and are much less talented. And then let it play out. Step out of the way. Let the creators create. Be confident in your own hiring. And if it doesn't work out, you fire them. And if the editor is messing up and is taking it in the wrong direction, fire him. And replace him. But be passionate about it, for God's sake, and love what you're doing, and do that and show that by hiring people that love it and know what they're doing.
So it sounds like one of the big solutions is obviously the editorial and getting good talented editors. And you talked about kind of how this knowledge was passed down from generation to generation to the next editor, and obviously somewhere it stopped, right? That knowledge stopped getting passed down. Do you see that there are any editors out there that can actually train a new generation, or do you think it's going to have to come from like new people, maybe talking to yourselves, trying to learn how you were kind of edited and everything like that, and how your editors advised you? Are there people that can still train these new editors, or is it going to have to be like you're having to have to learn from the ground up because DC and Marvel just don't have that? They don't have the talent. They don't have the knowledge, that institutional knowledge anymore.
That's a tough question. I really don't know the answer to that because I'm not plugged in enough to know who's left
Right.
up there that could do that. Certainly, they could hire people that maybe weren't editors, but have a lot of experience, writers who have been around a long time. Like a guy like Chuck Dixon could very easily be an editor if he had any interest in doing so, which he does not. But I'm just saying that there are people out there. I could be a good editor. One of the things an editor has to be able to do is you have to know, first you have to be able to spot problems, and you have to know the answer to correct them. So if there's a story problem, you have to be able to spotlight that and say, okay, we got a problem here. Communicate that to the writer as to what direction you want it to go, and then let him correct it and fix it maybe in his own way. But you can't just say, this doesn't feel right, something's wrong here. You've got to tell them why. Then the same thing goes for artwork. You have to be able to say, well, you broke the 180 rule here. This is confusing to your reader, and once you lose that reader in this sequence, we've lost him from the story. We've no longer immersed him in the story. So these are things that good editors can communicate to, and problems that they can spot.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to these other two points here. After product quality and attracting talent, you identified distribution of product and the shrinking reader base. I think these are obvious problems that you've identified here. Obviously, we know the history with Diamond basically being sidelined, and they've moved on to HarperCollins and Lunar distribution for the most part. And then I think there's even some kind of book distribution with a lot of the trade paperback stuff and things like that. And then the shrinking reader base, I think, is very obvious. We saw those numbers shrinking for the past half decade when they were actually, we actually had the Diamond numbers to look at. Now, again, like we said, they don't show, we don't see that data anymore. And for the most part, when you look at ICV2 numbers, you see a lot of these books just getting destroyed by manga. When you look at the top 20 adult graphic novels, it's all Japanese manga for the most part. You might have maybe one or two American comic books, but they're not even like a Marvel or DC book. It's usually some kind of hardcover like biography or something like that a celebrity's been hawking, or something, politician or something like that. So I think those problems are obvious. Can you explain a little bit about your solutions for these problems?
as I said, these things are very intertwined. Uh, One of the problems and saviors of our business at one point was the direct distribution and the rise of the comic book store, because we were slowly phasing out of newspaper periodical distribution. Um, as I said in the piece there, for a few reasons. Um, but that doesn't mean we give up on it. You know, we need to start getting comics to more people so that they're out there. The problem with comic book shops is that not every town has one, and there's no accidental comic book reader. Um, a kid that's 12 years old doesn't drive, so he has to be able to go someplace and find comics and discover them. And if there's no comic book store, that ain't going to happen. Um, when I was a kid, every luncheonette, every cigar store, every 7-Eleven had comic books, had spinner racks in them, as well as magazines and stuff like that. And that's how I discovered comics. You know, I found them, I saw them there, they were attractive and stuff like that. So we have to increase the exposure of comics in other places. Now, it's easy to say, but hard to do. You've got to get into bed with other distributors that handle that. You have to have stockers that are going to stock the stuff. Um, there was a price point issue originally, but we can overcome that by collecting already done stories. And it doesn't have to. We don't have to be collecting, Kirby and Ditko stories. We could be collecting stories just from a year ago, 2 years ago, something like that. Put a whole story arc, 3-4 issues together, and make that an issue one, in sort of a thicker or magazine style, that you could charge, $8 for. $9 for.
Yeah, this seems like
Um,
something Dan Didio talked about when he was the publisher of DC, and he was always talking about how their Facsimile editions were selling better than their newer stuff. And I was always like shocked. Well, if that's the case, like why aren't you putting out more collected editions of your old stuff and like getting it out there at different price points and
mhm,
different collections? Because obviously, I think there's a different audience for someone who's going to buy a trade paperback than someone who's going to buy a collected edition or an absolute edition. And who's to say you can't even create other kinds of different comics packaged in different styles.
well, the other side of that statement is that there's an admittance there that the new stuff is no good. Because
Oh
the
yeah, yeah.
people are
Yeah,
buying, stuff that was published 20, 30 years ago. They're buying the facsimiles of The Vengeance of Bane #1 over Batman comics, you know.
right,
Uh,
and that goes back to your first point with the quality content and everything like that.
right.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously, if you have the quality stuff, then we get into this distribution issue,
Hmm.
and you're talking about getting it in front of different people, finding different outlets, finding different distributors. I'm always kind of like surprised there hasn't been maybe something like I remember Beanie Babies did stuff with McDonald's when they made those, like I don't know, in the '90s when I was a little kid, they
Hmm.
did something like that. I'm surprised there hasn't been any kind of brand marketing with maybe doing some kind of distribution deal with that. Like DC even has these kind of like manga style. They just announced these kind of manga style collections that they're going to be putting out. I feel like that would be maybe something they could do with a distribution deal with a place like McDonald's or something like that. Obviously, there's expenses to that, but
Sure.
it doesn't even seem like they're even trying to come up with like
Yeah.
innovative ideas like that.
Why wasn't there a display in every movie theater that showed the Avengers? And having Iron
Yeah.
Man comics, Thor comics, Captain America comics, and Avengers comics on a rack or a stand in the lobby
Yeah,
there.
it's like they didn't even pitch that to the theaters. It's like, hey, maybe we give you these stands or whatever, and
Yeah.
sell you these comics, and you make a profit off of them or
Hmm.
whatever.
How about
You
coffee
sell them.
shops? How about a
Yeah.
coffee shop? People are in there sitting around. You got a stand of comics there. They can go in there, get their coffee and their cruller, and and read a comic book. You know, uh, you got to get them where people are, and particularly you got to get them where kids are. If we want to start growing the audience.
It's almost like the publishers are not interested in this at all, because I've actually seen some of the retailers, they're closing down their main shops, but they're not closing their business in general. There's a store out in California, I believe, that is doing this. They closed down their main shop, but they're going into like kind of doing these like pop-up shops in coffee shops in places where people are to try and
Oh,
sell their
okay.
comics to those people. And it's like, well, where's the publisher support on this? And this is one of the things I found out is it doesn't seem there is any kind of publisher support when you listen to Phil Boyle and John Robinson speaking with Mark Miller. They're talking
Yeah.
about how a solution for them is like, well, let's just do the buyback thing, but it's half and half. So like we're on the hook for half, you're on the hook for half, and kind of get it for that. So you're kind of sharing that. Whereas like I feel like the publishers are almost kind of out of touch with the comic shops in general right now, and they really just don't care if those shops end up shutting down. At the end of the day, it seems like because they're just kind of insulated because they're kind of owned by these two massive corporations in Warner
Mhm.
Brothers and Disney that don't really seem to look at what's going on in those sectors.
Well, as I said in the close of the article, is that I feel that they don't consider themselves publishers anymore. Certainly, the corporate top uh, dogs don't consider Marvel and DC as publishers. They consider them as IP farms, and they just don't give a shit. And it's evident, you know. They made billions on these movies, and this is an interesting part too. Is that all the successful movies uh, were about the characters as they used to be,
Yeah,
as we
Captain
remember them.
America,
Yeah,
Thor, perfect
as
example.
we remember them. And then they started in phase 3 or phase 4, whatever it was. Um, for me, it was Thor Ragnarok that began the end,
Yeah,
where it was just a
I'm with
big,
you. Oh, totally
yeah,
with you on that. I hated that
that
movie
was the
so
beginning
much.
of the end right there. And then it's just gotten worse and worse since then.
Yeah, that was the movie where they decided to completely humiliate Loki and not have him act the way he would act, and treated him as a complete and utter joke. And I could not stand that
They
at all. And it
emasculated
was,
Thor, they emasculated
yep,
the Hulk, the two most powerful characters in the Marvel universe, and made the death of millions look like a joke
yeah,
with the end of Asgard to be a punchline. It was horrible. It pissed me off. That's what it did because I love both those characters, Thor and Hulk. Um, and as an aside here, I'm just going to tell you how I would have written Endgame. Uh, is that the last one? Endgame?
uh, Avengers Endgame was the kind of final battle against
Yeah,
Thanos with
yeah,
the
yeah.
time travel and all
That's
that
the one.
stuff. Yeah,
So they've turned Hulk into a soy boy, and they even compare and contrast him when he goes back in time to New York, and we see the Rage Hulk, who's obviously super cool, and then we see him contrasted with Soy Hulk, and you're like, oh Jesus, this is terrible. They should never have contrasted the two.
yeah,
But I thought, well, maybe at the end there, when the bombs hit the Stark's building and it all crumbles and everything, and Hulk is underneath there holding it up, and he's barely doing it. That should have been the moment as the shit's hitting the fan and everything is happening, and Thanos is getting the upper hand. That Rage Hulk takes over, and that he comes up from underneath, and the Stark's building explodes off of him because the angrier he gets, the stronger he gets, and then Hulk just goes in there and leads the army and fricking beats the living shit out of Thanos.
yeah. That would
That
have
would have
that
been
It would
awesome.
have been because it's also it's like you get the redemption after Thanos like beat the crap out of him in
Yep.
the beginning of Infinity War. You get rid of like the kind of soy boy Hulk that you're talking about there, and he's like he's had enough, and you basically broke him. You broke it was the last straw that broke the camel's back, right? And he erupts,
Yeah.
and you don't want to let that happen. There's probably a reason why that didn't happen. They don't want to give people that hope that something like that can happen. Um, but yeah, that would have been much more entertaining, I think, as well. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really enjoy your insights here into the comic book industry and the solutions that you have to offer. I think these are really good solutions. I don't think that, as you say here, I don't think DC or Marvel are going to do it. I don't think that they have the people in place that are willing to listen to any of these solutions
Yeah.
at this point. And it's unfortunate, but um,
Yeah,
I
I'm
do
probably
appreciate
yelling
that.
in the wind here, but at least I'm getting it out there. Maybe somebody will see it. Maybe they'll think about it. It might spark something. Uh, but in the meantime, if you want really cool comics that are exciting and fun, you can go to compasscomics.com and read mine.
Yeah, I recommend all of them. I think I own all of the Compass comics. I own the Chinoo. I own Two-Fisted Manly Tales, which I think is absolutely excellent. Some of the best comic book stories I think that have ever been created are in there. I really enjoy a
I
lot of
see
those
Joe
shorts.
Frankenstein behind you.
Yeah. Yep, I've got the second volume of Joe Frankenstein right here. I've got the first one is back in there as well.
Nice.
I've got oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name right now. The Alamo one,
Oh,
Alien
Alien
Alamo.
Alamo. Uh-huh.
I've got Alien Alamo. I've got them all. I'm really looking forward to Ghosts of Matacumbe Key because you've been teasing that ties them all together into your
Yep.
Nolan verse there. So yeah, I've really enjoyed a lot of your stuff. I think it's some of the best comics out there right now,
Thank you,
and
John.
I always look forward to the next thing that you're creating. And if I'm being honest, I wish you would put them out a little bit faster because they're so good. I want to,
They take time, man. They
I
take
know.
time.
That's why they're so good. That's why they're so good. So I
It's
do appreciate that. But
But, you know,
thank you
I
so.
have a passion for it. All I ever wanted to do from the time I was 12 years old is create comics. And I love this industry. I love the art form. I love studying the history of this business. And I have great hope that we can turn things around and build a really strong independent section of comics and still keep the traditional stuff alive as well. And I'm hoping, and praying that that is what happens, that they just don't crash and burn. But if they do crash and burn, well, then
Something will rise from the
I'm in a
ashes,
good
right?
position. So
Yeah. Yes. There you go. All right. Well, thank you so much, Graham, for joining us. I really enjoyed getting your thoughts on this here. And if you have any ideas, let us know in the comments below. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a great day.
thank you. Merry Christmas to your family, John.
Merry Christmas to you as well.
Thank you.